they were born on the boundless space of the steppe. And in the middle of the first millennium, they descended upon Europe. The Huns, Avars, Bulgars, Khazars. 4 civilizations. 4 nations that left a shining mark in world history. In the early 20th century, Cambridge received a large collection of ancient manuscripts found in Egypt. Among them was a unique letter that spoke of a disappeared nation, the Khazars. 2 more letters in which the Khazars were also mentioned appeared in Oxford and St. Petersburg. These letters caused a sensation in the scientific world and became the topic of fierce controversy and discussion. Now, Oleg prepares with the power of his sword the doom of the Khazars, his neighbors. Their insolent raids he would justly reward with fire and the steel of his sabers. Thanks to Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, everyone remembers that there was once a nation such as the Khazars. But that's not all that we know about them. The Khazar Khaganate, along with the Byzantine Empire, was the largest state in Eastern Europe. The Khazars converted to Judaism, conquered quite a few nations, and ruled the Caspian region for several centuries. The initial heart of the Khaganate is believed to have been what is now Dagestan, where the Khazars had their capital, Semender. Then, under pressure from the Arabs, they moved to the lower reaches of the Volga, built a new capital, Atil, and took control of large areas from the Kazakh steppes to the Dnieper, while collecting tribute from neighboring peoples. In historical science, it has long been believed that Khazaria's economy was based on trade, and that the Khazars mainly obtained their profits from controlling the Volga, a rich trade route between Europe and the Arabian East. Archaeologist Valery Fyurov has studied remnants of the Khazar era for many years and doesn't agree with such a narrow viewpoint. Indeed, he's sure that the Khaganate also had developed agriculture. Reaping hooks and scythes are pretty common finds, as in any peasant farm of later periods. Millstones. There's not a single explored Khazar settlement in which millstones have not been found. The development of metallurgy is impressive, simply amazing. Dozens of furnaces have been found, and the total productivity of these furnaces, in which ordinary iron balls were melted, reached dozens of tons. The Khazar Khaganate provided completely for itself with metal, ferrous metal in particular. Tools, weapons, military ammunition, jewelry. Thanks to developed crafts and agriculture, the Khaganate population didn't just provide for itself with metal, but with all the requirements of peace and war. Trade and control over it were just a small part of their activities. It's known that the Khazars collected a tithe. Still, the tithe was collected by virtually all nations through whose territory, for example, the Silk Road passed. To emphasize that trade was all that sustained the Khazars is fundamentally wrong. So the economy of the Khazar Khaganate was powerful and diverse. Still, there is a but. It's not clear how deeply the Khazars themselves were involved in it all. After all, the Khazar Khaganate was a union of a great many tribes. Having hundreds, if not thousands of writings about the Khazar Khaganate, now we still cannot say how much of the population was ethnic Khazar. Their proportion was probably minimal. This was the ruling elite, a rich stratum. It's what we'd call the court. These were the leaders. How did a small Khazar group manage to conquer so many nations? From where did they come to the Volga? And why did they convert to Judaism? Historians still have many questions, and written sources are scarce, and the most important, the best-known sources, are those three letters. The very first letter is now kept thousands of miles from hot Cairo, in Oxford's Christ Church College. In the early 20th century, the British bought part of Cairo's Geniza archives and took them to Cambridge and Oxford. The letter was written by Hasdai ibn Shaprut, a 10th century Spanish Jew. He began as an ordinary doctor, but managed to build an amazing career in the court of Abd ar-Rahman III, the Caliph of Cordoba. This Muslim state was on the territory of present-day Spain and Portugal, and reached its peak in Hasdai ibn Shaprut's time.
Hasdai ibn Shaprut с помощью древних рукописей и при помощи
Hasdai ibn Shaprut, with the help of ancient manuscripts and Byzantine monks, deciphered the secret of an ancient medicine that successfully improved the caliph's health, and that became a turning point in his career.
пунктом его карьеры.
Это было удивительное время, когда евреи и мусульмане.
It was an amazing time when Jews, Muslims, and Arabs created a single culture, a single state. The Arabs needed specialists in fields like writing, international relations, as well as banking and lending. They employed Jews with experience in those spheres.
Hasdai
ibn Shaprut was actually the prime minister, the chancellor to put it in modern language, in the government of Abd ar-Rahman, caliph or emir of Cordoba. According to the letter, once the Eastern merchants arrived in the caliph's court, they informed Hasdai ibn Shaprut that somewhere far away, on the steppes of Asia, lived the Khazar people. They professed Judaism and had their own state ruled by a king, Iosif. This news astonished the nobleman. It was of political, human, and religious interest, because the Jews were waiting signs of a return to their holy land when the Messiah would appear. And the fact that a Jewish state had appeared was seen as a sign that the grace of Almighty God had returned to the people who'd been expelled from Palestine. Excited by the good news, Hasdai ibn Shaprut writes a lengthy letter to the Khazar king Iosif. He is literally interested in everything: geography, culture, history, and of course, faith, the origin of the Khazars. The nobleman's original letter has not been preserved, but there is a later copy of it in Oxford. Hasdai ibn Shaprut sent his letter into the virtually unknown, but King Iosif did receive his message. He even replied. Many centuries later, fragments of that letter, the second in a row, were found in Russia.
Здравствуйте.
Добрый день.
Hello. Hi.
То самое
Is
письмо.
that the same letter? Yes, this is a manuscript that contains a copy of the letter written by the Khazar king Iosif.
Эта рукопись попала в нашу библиотеку.
This manuscript came to our library in 1876,
Когда была приобретена вторая
when the second part of a collection belonging to a famous collector of Karate antiquities, Abraham Ferkovich, was purchased.
Самойловича Ферковича. Рукописи были привезены.
The manuscripts were taken to St. Petersburg from a place in Crimea called Chufit-Kale, where Ferkovich spent his last years.
Последние годы своей жизни провел.
Scholars gathered information on Khazaria piece by piece. And here is a letter from the Tsar himself.
Вот это письмо. Начало самое, здесь написано письмо Иосифа, царя, сына Аарона.
However, joy at the find was quickly replaced by skepticism. Experts suspected that this was not a genuine text, but a hoax. The truth is that Abraham Ferkovich had an ambiguous reputation. Karate by origin, he was a fervent supporter of the Karate faith.
Караимы – это одно из течений внутри иудаизма.
Karaism is one of the movements within Judaism. They are mostly known in relation to other Jews because they do not recognize the Talmud or rabbinical writing.
Они, так же, как и другие иудеи,
They, like other Jews, settled in different countries, and a significant Karate community lived and still lives on the Crimean Peninsula.
на территории Крымского полуострова. И князь Воронцов, тогдашний генерал...
And Prince Vorontsov, at that time Governor-General of the region, turned to the Karate community so that they could tell of their history, where they came from, who they were. And Abraham Ferkovich, who was still young at the time, expressed his desire to collect material on Karate history.
собрать материалы об истории караимов.
Ferkovich had good reason to accept the task. In 19th century Russia, there were a number of restrictions placed on Jews. They lived outside the Jewish pale of settlement and had restricted access to education and the authorities. Abraham Ferkovich attempted to prove that these restrictions should not apply to Karates.
Феркович выдвинул действительно такую концепцию, что караимы...
Ferkovich put forward a concept that the Karates who lived in the Crimean Peninsula were rarely descendants, distant, of course, of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, who had been taken captive and settled by the Assyrians.
ассирийцами.
They had already left Palestine by the time of Jesus Christ, and so had nothing to do with the crucifixion.
К распятию не имеют.
This is another nation, which had separated itself from the Jews who shouted, "Crucify him," long before Jesus delivered his sermon in Palestine. They had no blood on their hands. Therefore, the restrictions should not apply to them. The origin of the Karates is controversial. However, Abraham Ferkovich persistently sought evidence of the antiquity of his people and their equally ancient residence in Crimea, and apparently wasn't above forgery. Once, Ferkovich examined a Karate cemetery in Crimea and claimed that some gravestones dated back to the 10th and 11th centuries. However, even then, scientists suspected that Ferkovich had simply changed some of the dates on the stones, and that the graves were actually from later periods, the 16th and 17th centuries. One of my students, who studied at a Jewish university and here at the Institute of Slavic Studies, caught him red-handed. He found Ferkovich's earliest diary entries, where the tombstones he had altered with the correct dates were described. Losing reputation in the scientific world is easy. It's no wonder historians are skeptical about Abraham Ferkovich's heritage. But is the letter from King Iosif a forgery? To answer that question, let's read the ancient manuscript carefully. King Iosif's letter contains a lot of valuable information on the history of the Khazar Khaganate. He describes the size of his country, lists the peoples who pay him tribute, and mentions Atil, the capital on the Volga River. Hasbai ibn Shaprut hoped to find Jewish compatriots in the Khazars, but as King Yosef writes, his subjects trace their lineage back to the descendants of Japheth. Japheth, according to the Bible, was one of the 3 sons of the famous Noah, who built the ark to escape a great flood. Japheth took part in all these events and became the ancestor to all Caucasian peoples. The Jews, according to Holy Scripture, are descended from Shem, another of Noah's sons. And so, as King Yosef plainly states, the Khazars, including himself, were not Jews. They only converted to Judaism. Why did pagans, steppe people, suddenly make such an unexpected religious choice? This, perhaps, is one of the most interesting riddles in Khazar history. King Yosef himself refers to his ancestor, Bulan. Once Bulan saw an angel in a dream, and the angel said he should choose a religion for his people. Bulan called 3 priests and asked a Christian what faith he believed to be truer, Jewish or Muslim. He replied Jewish, because the Old Testament is a sacred book for Christians. He then asked a similar question of a Muslim, which is the truer faith, Jewish or Christian? He received the same answer, because Muslims respect Moses and other Old Testament prophets. Both priests fell into a logical trap, and Bulan chose Judaism. At first glance, that makes sense. Hasdai ibn Shaprut wrote to King Yosef, who wrote back to him in detail. However, examination of ancient texts is difficult. How reliable is the information contained in the letter? And is it confirmed by any other written sources or archaeological data? At the end of the last century, in the lower reaches of Volga, near the village of Samostelka, the remains of an ancient settlement were found. Large-scale excavations began on the site, and soon a theory emerged that this was Atil, the very capital of the Khazar king. This is also indicated by the size of the settlement, which is suitably royal, and fragments of broken red brick are literally everywhere. According to medieval writing, particularly that of Emperor Constantine, there was a royal monopoly in Khazaria in brick-making, and only the king had the right to use them for buildings. Yes. Nowhere else in the lower Volga region have we found such a quantity of bricks. That leads us to suppose that the Khazar fortress of that era stood here. Dmitry Vasilyev and his colleagues have excavated the Samostelka settlement for many years. As well as the bricks, archaeologists have found a lot of ceramics here, including finds in the lowest archaeological layers. The era of the lower layers can be very clearly established by radiocarbon dating, and they do correlate with the time of the late Khazar Khaganate, the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries. There's another coincidence. A description of the Khazar capital is preserved in Arab chronicles. Atil was divided by a river into 3 islands. There was a military post on one island, markets and public institutions on the second, and the third housed the Khagan's palace. The Samostelka settlement does correspond to that description. Aerial pictures show that it lies between creeks, which are now dried up. However, it's impossible to say definitely that this is Atil. The theory proposed by Dmitry Vasilyev and his colleagues is still only a theory. Excavations have only revealed a very small part of this settlement. We, the modern researchers, don't even know its boundaries. If we're to recognize Samosdelka as Atil, then we'll have to wait 50 to 100 years until a more or less significant area has been uncovered. Nothing is yet clear when it comes to the Khazar capital. There's even less certainty regarding their faith. According to King Iosif's letter, the Khazars were Jews by religion. However, so far, no synagogues, sacred objects, or burials conforming to Jewish rites have been found in Samosdelka. The same is true of all Khazar-era settlements that archaeologists have studied. There are many settlements and fortresses, but not a trace of Jewish culture within them. To date, only one artifact has been found throughout the whole huge Khazar Khaganate. This is quite an artless pot found in the area of present-day Mariupol, on which a menorah is depicted in a pretty unconventional way. What's more, working on this issue specifically, I failed to find any material remnants of the spread of Judaism within the territory of the Khazar Khaganate. There are no material traces, but there are written tracts. In Arab chronicles, there are references to a large Jewish community in the Khazar capital, Atil. However, it was by no means the only one.
В середине X века один из арабских книжников
In the mid-10th century, an Arab writer, Al-Masudi, described Khazar life in their cities.
Поселение городами.
He called these settlements cities and said that in the capital of Khazaria, Atil, and in the North Caucasus, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and pagans all lived side by side.
У них свои законы.
They have their own laws, their own judges. The Khagan, who lived separately in his palace, is called on to settle conflicts between those communities. That really was an example of civilized life that we can only dream about, even now.
Как мы с вами понимаем, мечтать и сейчас.
So it seems there were Jews in Khazaria, but for some reason they left no archaeological traces, which is strange considering that Judaism was an official religion. How can we explain all these inconsistencies? According to one theory, the whole point is that only the political elite, led by the king, converted to Judaism in Khazaria, and that they built no places of worship and prayed in ordinary tents. For the vast majority of subjects, sons of the steppes, it remained a foreign religion.
Зато археология дает громаднейший материал.
Archaeology provides an immense amount of material that shows that the entire population, regardless of ethnicity, Bulgars, Alans, and some groups whose names we may not even know, remained in the fold of paganism. Historians simply didn't give the Khaganate enough time for any world religion, in this case, Judaism, to spread. The fact that the king exaggerated the role of Judaism in his country is understandable. All in all, he wrote in reply to a Jew, a man of the same faith. But how do we deal with the blatant mistakes that are also present in the text? Firstly, the letter gives very inconsistent geographic information. The position of the rivers is all wrong, and the Caspian Sea is not at all where it should be. Secondly, and this is the main point, the letter mentions Crimea many times, including local toponyms, which only appeared in the 13th century. So the question is, how would King Iosif, who lived in the 10th century, have known them? It's because of these toponyms, and particularly the Crimean town of Mangup, that the scientists suspected Abraham Ferkovich of forgery. After all, there was a large Kareti community in Mangup, and it would only benefit Firkovich if it were mentioned in the text, to emphasize once again the antiquity of the Kareti community.
Для Ферковича важно было показать какие-то следы.
As a result of that, I must say Firkovich did manage to achieve a change in attitudes towards the Karetis.
Вот эти 10 колен. В результате надо сказать, что Ферковичу удалось добиться.
And finally, it was decided that the Karetis were not in the same category as the Hebrews and the Jews.
Приравнивались к иудеям, к евреям.
Но нужно сказать, что
Still, it is worth mentioning that Firkovich did not forge whole literary works and tombstones.
фабриковал.
All he did was to make up additions to the manuscripts. In particular, in these additions, there are many false facts invented by Firkovich himself about Khazaria and the Khazars, which are easy to debunk and which were already debunked in his own lifetime. Firkovich helped fellow Karetis. However, he confused the scientists. Is it possible to trust a letter which is very likely to have undergone dubious manipulation? And where is the evidence that it was indeed written by King Iosif? 19th century scientists lost themselves in conjecture. And in the early 20th century, another letter appeared, the third. Another discovery was made in the Cambridge University Library, where the majority of the Cairo Geniza manuscripts are kept. It all started with two women, Agnes and Margaret Smith. The two sisters traveled across the East buying manuscripts from random traders. At one point they realized that in Cairo at the time, something was being sold out or a very significant collection was being broken up. They brought one of those sheets to Cambridge, and their friend, Solomon Schechter, became interested. Solomon Schechter, a famous researcher of ancient manuscripts, immediately headed for Cairo and bought the collection. The documents were in terrible condition, with heaps of them stored in wooden boxes like this. Geniza is a big garbage can. Items of no more practical application were placed there. They were preserved thanks to Egypt's climate, not because anyone did anything to them. Eventually they arrived safely in Cambridge, where they were sorted and restored, and now they're available to researchers. Looking through the documents, Solomon Schechter found this letter. There was a detailed account of Khazaria and the Khazar Jews. Like the previous two letters, this is not the original, but a medieval copy. If you look here, even the lines are visible. This is a paper of a later period. Because you won't see things like this on early Eastern paper. This letter is the most mysterious of all. Firstly, it's not clear who wrote it. The beginning and end of the letter are lost. Secondly, the addressee is not mentioned in the text. And finally, the time of writing is unknown. As there are tens of thousands of letters in Geniza, and a great many of them have no beginning, no ending, or a clear side, or other place where the author's name is normally written. No wonder we don't know who, when, or how this letter was penned. Judging by the fact that they reproduce the same topics that are mentioned in King Iosif's letter, well, perhaps this is a reply to Hasdai ibn Shaprut's letter. The author of this letter is supposedly a subject of the king. He reports many new details. Among other things, he writes about how a large Jewish community appeared in Khazaria, which is also mentioned in Arab sources. According to the letter, some Jews were oppressed, and they fled from Armenia, or through Armenia. Here a double interpretation is possible, to the Caspian Sea. Here they were well received by and stayed with the Khazars. The ancestors of the Khazar Jews mingled with the pagans and learned about their activities. At the same time, most of the foundations of Judaism were forgotten, except the Sabbath and circumcision. However, then one of the Jews became a high authority, a commander. According to the letter, he decided to return his community to the faith of their ancestors, and apparently, at the same time, extended it to Khazars. According to one theory, politics forced the Khazar elite to convert to Judaism. On the one hand, the Khaganate was threatened by Arab Muslims, with whom the Khazars waged constant war. And on the Black Sea, they competed with another powerful neighbor, Christian Byzantium. In this situation, Judaism was a wise political choice. The Khazars emphasized their independence, making it clear that they were following their own path, which, moreover, did not require much effort from the Khagan.
Если бы он принял ислам,
If he had converted to Islam, he would have had to ride around all the cities and villages under his control and explain to them that they must practice circumcision and pray to Muhammad and Allah. That is, to impose Islamization. The same thing Bulan would have had to do if he'd converted to Christianity. Judaism required none of that because only a person who agreed voluntarily to convert could become a Jew. The letter from the Cambridge anonym clarifies many historical Khazar issues. But why would anyone want to duplicate King Yusuf's reply? And can it be trusted? Like the two previous letters, this document also raises questions. One can be sure of the fact that this letter is an authentic part of the Geniza collection, and that no one sneaked it into the ship when Shishta was transporting the materials to England. In that sense, this, of course, is not a fake. Is all the correspondence between the so-called Khazar Khagan, or king, and Ibn Shaprut a fake? That is a completely different matter. Julia does not rule out that all the correspondence could have been forged by Hasdai ibn Shaprut himself, to impress his patron, Abd ar-Rahman III, and to bolster both his own positions and the situation of Jews in general in the Caliphate of Cordoba. I believe that the so-called Khazar Jewish correspondence is a literary work, and that this work pursued political goals. It could be composed either directly by someone close to Hasdai ibn Shaprut, or by someone at the request of Hasdai ibn Shaprut, and could even have been sent back to Spain if necessary. Julia is not alone in her suspicions. By the 19th century, researchers were suggesting that all correspondence had been fabricated in the Middle Ages, and they even found a reason. At the turn of the 9th century, two new states appeared on the world map: Kievan Rus and Volga Bulgaria. For many years, the Bulgarians and some Slavs had paid tribute to the Khazar Khaganate, but it was time to be rid of that servitude. The Russo-Khazarian wars continued throughout the 10th century, and in the 960s, Prince Sviatoslav attacked Atil and razed it to the ground. The Bulgarians gained their freedom from the Khazars and free trade along the Volga. The Rus people conquered several Khazar cities, and the Khazars were soon assimilated by other nations without trace. After the defeat of the Khaganate, dark times came for the Jewish community of Khazaria. Again they were left without a home, and again were forced to flee. The dream of their own Jewish state vanished into thin air. In the Middle Ages, the Jews had a hard life. They were expelled from everywhere, and everywhere they faced violence and humiliation. Scientists thought that this had served as a breeding ground for the hoax, and all the correspondence was created by medieval authors in order to encourage the Jewish fighting spirit and remind them that there was light at the end of the tunnel, that they were historic examples of the creation of a Jewish state. However, these suspicions were later refuted. In 1924, English scientists found a unique manuscript in the British Historical Museum, a book by the Spanish Jew Judah ben Barzillai, published in the 11th century. Historians carefully studied the texts in the book and found among them a letter from King Iosif, the oldest known version of that text to date. As the book was published in the 11th century, it became clear that all later copies of letters were not the invention of medieval authors, but did actually date back to a more ancient text. And here's the dead end. What kind of text is this? Genuine correspondence between Hasdai ibn Shaprut and the Khazar king, or a fake? We can only guess. The Jewish nobleman left a riddle for future generations to which there is still no key. I wouldn't take it at face value. Like any historical work and like any diplomatic correspondence, it has political overtones. And we don't know enough about those political implications to be able to view these texts as a reflection of historical reality. Julia's is just one theory. Many researchers consider the Khazar Jewish correspondence to be genuine. Even if these letters were invented, they weren't just pulled out of a hat, and do still reflect real events. And that's a reason to keep working, searching for new data, comparing, thinking. Now Oleg prepares with the power of his sword the doom of the Khazars, his neighbors. Their insolent raids he would justly reward with fire and the steel of his sabers. Thanks to Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, everyone remembers how the Khazar story ended. However, it can't be reduced to those brief lines. And thanks to the letters that survived and came to us from the depths of the past, we now know how things might really have been.